After my sister-in-law called the cops on me, I said no to babysitting. Now her world is crumbling. The tipping point, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to shatter, but I didn't know what. It was like standing on the edge of a cliff, the wind howling, your feet shifting, and you just knew you couldn't stay there much longer. That morning, something was different. I could feel the tension in the air, but I had no idea it would explode into a situation that would change everything. My name is Ashley, I'm 32, and I'm a pediatric therapist. I spend my days helping kids with disabilities find their way in the world, but lately, it's been hard to concentrate on my work. A weight had settled on my chest, and it was all because of my sister-in-law, Sarah. I had no idea it would all unravel that day when I dropped my kids off at her house and then went to work like I had 1,000 times before. I hadn't even seen her that morning, and honestly, I didn't want to, but that didn't matter anymore. I had no idea what was coming for me. We had an arrangement. We were supposed to be helping each other out. Sarah would watch my kids 3 days a week, and I would return the favor by watching hers. Simple. No money exchanged, no hard feelings, no drama. We've been doing this since March 2020, when the world fell apart because of the pandemic. It was a win-win, or so I thought. That day started like any other. I dropped my kids off at Sarah's and didn't even go inside. We were both in a rush, and sometimes we just kept things low-key. It wasn't unusual, especially if one of us didn't feel like chatting. I didn't think twice about it. But when I checked my phone an hour later, everything changed. There were 20 missed calls from Sarah. And the text messages, they made my stomach twist. Sarah was livid. Apparently, the tiny disagreement we'd had the day before had spiraled into something far worse in her mind. I hadn't checked my phone. I hadn't responded. I had disrespected her. And now, she wasn't going to watch my kids. Then came the threats. She said if I didn't pick up my kids within the next 45 minutes, she was calling the cops. I couldn't believe it. She couldn't be serious. It had only been a few hours, but Sarah's wrath was real. My heart raced as I read her final message. "You're going to pay for this." I couldn't understand it. How had we gone from being family to this? It was supposed to be simple. But now, the idea of her calling the cops on me, her own sister-in-law, felt like something straight out of a nightmare. I tried calling her back, but it was too late. I had to leave work immediately, but I couldn't drop everything. I explained to my boss, and she was understanding, but I had to finish up a few things before I could go. The clock was ticking, and the more I thought about what was happening, the more my blood boiled. By the time I got to Sarah's house, I saw 2 squad cars parked outside, lights flashing. My kids were standing on the porch, looking terrified. Sarah stood there, talking to the officers like she was the victim, her smug expression telling me everything I needed to know. She had called the cops on her own family. This wasn't just a disagreement. It was an all-out betrayal. I took a deep breath, forced myself to stay calm, and walked up to the cops. "This is a misunderstanding," I told them. "I didn't abandon my kids. I dropped them off here like usual, and when I got to work, I didn't see her messages until it was too late." The officer looked at me, his gaze skeptical. "You didn't see her messages?" "No," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I was driving. My phone was on silent. I called her back as soon as I could." One of the cops shrugged. "Sounds like a communication issue. No crime here. But, just make sure this doesn't happen again." I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell them they didn't understand. Sarah knew what she was doing. She knew exactly what calling the cops could do to me, to my career. She knew that working with kids meant that any hint of child abandonment on my record could ruin me. But she didn't care. I grabbed my kids, put them in the car, and didn't even look at Sarah as I walked away. She called after me, her voice dripping with venom. "Maybe next time you'll check your phone," she shouted. "This is your fault, not mine." I slammed the car door shut. My blood was boiling, but I knew if I said anything, it would just make it worse. It wasn't worth it. The damage was done. The next few days felt like a blur. I couldn't stop replaying the scene in my head. Sarah, smug and righteous, watching me as I tried to explain myself to the police. My kids, standing there on the porch, scared out of their minds. The fact that I had to explain myself, of all people, to the police, like I was the one who'd done something wrong. I couldn't shake the anger that kept creeping up inside me. Every time I thought about it, my blood boiled again. How could she have done that? How could she have put me in that position, knowing how much was at stake? She knew exactly what that call to the cops could do to me. My career, my reputation, it could have all been over in a single phone call. And for what? Because of a petty argument that, honestly, I could hardly even remember? It wasn't just the fact that she'd called the cops. It was the complete lack of care she showed. She didn't give a damn about what it could do to me or to my family. She just wanted to make me pay for something that, in the grand scheme of things, was nothing. I didn't even know how to talk to Mike about it. When he called me a few days later, I was ready to explode. He started off trying to be reasonable, at least that's how it sounded at first. He said Sarah had apologized and wanted to go back to the old babysitting schedule. I stared at the message for a while, just seething. Apologize? She had the nerve to apologize after pulling that stunt? After risking my entire career, she thought a simple apology was enough to fix everything? I was done. No, Sarah, I replied. We're not going back to anything. You called the cops on me. You knew what that could have done to me, and you didn't care. So no, I won't be babysitting your kids ever again. You figure it out. The next part, her response, was a joke. If you checked your phone when you dropped the kids off, none of this would have happened, she said, as if the entire disaster was my fault. I snapped. You crossed a line, Sarah, and I'm done with you. I typed back. She texted me for days afterward, trying to guilt-trip me into forgiving her. But I wasn't having it. I blocked her number. That was it. Or at least I thought it was. It wasn't long before Mike called me, and I could tell from the start it was going to be bad. He was angry, yelling at me, trying to convince me to let it go. Why can't you just forgive her? He asked. We're family. You're really going to let one mistake ruin everything? I nearly lost it. One mistake. I shot back. She called the cops on me, Mike. Do you understand what that could have done? If the cops hadn't believed me, my career would have been ruined. And for what? Because she couldn't be bothered to communicate like an adult. Mike didn't get it. He never would. You're screwing us over, Ashley, he yelled. Sarah had to quit her job because we can't afford childcare. Now, do you even care what this is doing to us? I wanted to scream. Not my problem, I told him. You and Sarah made your bed. Now you lie in it. The call ended with me slamming my phone down. It was a gut punch, and I could feel the anger bubbling inside me. This wasn't just about babysitting anymore. It was about boundaries being crossed, respect being thrown out the window. It was about me taking a stand for myself and for my family, no matter what Mike or Sarah thought. But then came the next phone call. This time it was from my mom. I braced myself. Why can't you just forgive her, Ash? She said. She's your sister-in-law. Families shouldn't fall apart over one mistake. One mistake? I couldn't believe she was saying this. Mom, this isn't about an apology anymore. It's about Sarah's complete lack of respect for me. She put my career at risk. She knew what she was doing when she called the cops, and she didn't care. And now, you're asking me to just let it go. My mom didn't respond right away, and I could hear the guilt in her voice. I just want everyone to get along, she said quietly. I want things to go back to normal. But normal? Normal wasn't letting Sarah get away with this. Normal wasn't putting up with this kind of behavior from anyone, not even family. I had to make her understand. Mom, I get it. You're trying to keep the peace, but peace isn't always the answer. Not when it means letting people walk all over you. She was quiet for a long time after that, and I knew I had to say one last thing. You have to stop letting Sarah manipulate you, Mom. She's not your responsibility, and you need to stop letting her treat you like this. The call ended, but my heart was still racing. I felt like I was fighting an uphill battle. I didn't want to fight my mom, but I couldn't keep quiet when it felt like everyone was just letting Sarah get away with everything. I thought things couldn't get any worse. I thought I had seen the lowest point, but I was wrong. The fallout from that day, from Sarah calling the cops on me, was far from over. And this time, it was my mom who was paying the price for it. For days after my conversation with her, she seemed off. I could hear it in her voice, see it in her face when I went to check on her. She was exhausted, physically drained, like she was carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. And I knew exactly why. Sarah had dropped her kids off again, despite everything I'd said, despite the fact that I had told my mom she had to stop babysitting for them. I had told her, more than once, that she didn't owe Sarah anything. But my mom couldn't say no. She couldn't stand the thought of her grandkids being without help, and Sarah had a way of guilt-tripping her into agreeing. It was manipulative, it was unhealthy, and it was slowly breaking my mom. One afternoon, I got a call from her at work. She sounded winded, her voice shaky. I immediately dropped everything and rushed over to her place. My heart was pounding as I drove there. When I walked in, she was sitting on the couch, pale as a ghost, looking completely defeated. She barely looked up when I walked in, and my stomach twisted with worry. "What's wrong, Mom?" I asked, crouching down in front of her. "I don't feel well," she whispered, rubbing her chest. "It's tight, and I have a headache I can't shake." I felt a wave of panic. I didn't even hesitate. I helped her up and drove her straight to the doctor. My mind raced the entire way there, knowing exactly what the problem was. Stress. The kind of stress that only came from dealing with Sarah and Mike's mess. The doctor didn't mince words. "Your blood pressure is dangerously high. You need to take it easy and avoid any major stressors." I tried to stay calm, but the reality hit me hard. Sarah and Mike were putting her health at risk. It wasn't just their irresponsibility that was ruining everything. It was the ripple effect of their actions, and now my mom was the one suffering. As soon as we got home, I sat her down. "Mom, this has to stop," I said, my voice firm. "You can't keep helping them. You're putting yourself at risk." She didn't argue, but I could see the guilt in her eyes. "But they're my grandkids," she said, her voice trembling. "I can't just turn them away." "No, Mom," I said, shaking my head. "You're not responsible for them. You can love them without sacrificing your health for them." She didn't respond, but I could tell she was torn. She wasn't ready to stand up to them. Not yet. But I was. And I was done watching my mom fall apart because of them. The next time Sarah dropped her kids off at my mom's house, I was there. I wasn't going to let her get away with it. I wasn't going to sit back and watch her ruin my mom's health any longer. I'd planned on just checking in on my mom, but when I saw Sarah walking up to the door, smiling that fake smile of hers, I knew this was it. This was the moment I had to put my foot down. "Actually, no," I said, stepping in front of Sarah before she could even get inside. Her eyes narrowed as she looked at me. "What do you mean, no?" she asked, already defensive. "You're not leaving your kids here," I said, crossing my arms. "Mom just got out of the doctor's office because of her blood pressure, and the last thing she needs is to babysit your kids." Sarah's face turned red, but I didn't care. "I'm not sitting on my ass, Ashley," she snapped. "I'm handling everything at home while Mike works. You have no idea how hard this is." "Oh, I have an idea," I shot back. "And guess what? It's your responsibility, not Mom's." "Not mine. Yours." My mom, as always, tried to intervene. "Ashley, let's talk about this later." "No, Mom," I said, turning to her. "This isn't about talking anymore. You've been bending over backward for them, and look where it's gotten you. You're at the doctor's office with sky-high blood pressure. It's time to stop." Sarah's eyes flashed with fury. "You don't get to decide this," she hissed. "Oh, I do," I said, voice cold. "Because if you don't stop, I'll make sure everyone sees what you're really doing to Mom. This isn't about helping. It's about taking advantage." Sarah's kids were still standing behind her, looking confused, and I felt a pang of guilt for them. They didn't ask for any of this. But it was too late to go back now. Sarah stormed out, yelling all the way, "You're ruining everything, Ashley. You're ruining this family." I didn't care. For once, I was doing something for my mom. For once, I was standing up to Sarah. And it felt good. But of course, the drama didn't end there. The next few days were a whirlwind of phone calls, guilt trips, and messages from Sarah, trying to manipulate me into backing down. But I was done. I wasn't backing down. I wasn't going to let Sarah or Mike walk all over my family anymore. My mom, though, she still wasn't convinced. She couldn't see past her own guilt to stand up to Sarah, and that was going to cost her. Things escalated quickly after that confrontation. I knew Sarah wasn't the type to back down. She wasn't going to accept that I had set a boundary and that I was no longer going to let her and Mike dictate our family's life. But even I wasn't prepared for the level of chaos that followed. The worst part wasn't even Sarah herself, it was Mike. As much as I hated to admit it, Mike had always been a little weak when it came to Sarah. He always made excuses for her, constantly defending her actions, no matter how wrong she was. But when he found out what I had done, when he learned that I wasn't backing down, that's when the real emotional manipulation started. It came as no surprise when he called me furious just a few hours after the incident. His voice was full of anger, and I could feel his frustration crackling through the phone. "You really had to do this, didn't you?" Mike spat, his words clipped. "You had to ruin everything." "Ruin everything?" I shot back, trying to hold my ground. "Mike, you two are ruining everything, not me. You and Sarah have been abusing Mom's kindness for years, and now look where we are. Mom's blood pressure is through the roof. She's barely holding it together. And you're still playing the victim. How about you take some responsibility for once?" "I'm not playing the victim," he yelled. "You think you have it so much better than us? We're struggling here, Ashley. You have no idea what it's like to raise kids with no support." I could feel my patience wearing thin. "I'm not your punching bag, Mike. I'm not here to fix your messes. And you know what? I'm done trying to make you understand. You and Sarah need to figure your life out, because I'm not doing it for you anymore." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and for a moment I thought maybe, just maybe, he'd finally hear me. But that wasn't Mike. He didn't hear me. He couldn't. "You're just selfish," he muttered, his voice tinged with something close to desperation. "You're tearing this family apart." "Good," I said, voice steady, "because you and Sarah have been tearing it apart for years. Maybe this is exactly what needs to happen. Maybe you need to hit rock bottom before you wake up and realize how bad you've screwed things up." The line went dead. I didn't wait around to see if he'd call back. I was done. But the next part of the story, the part that really shook me, came from an unexpected source, my mom. I'd hoped that after seeing the toll that Sarah and Mike's actions were taking on her health, my mom would finally put her foot down and refuse to help them. But it was hard. She didn't want to feel like she was abandoning anyone, especially her grandkids. So when I got another call from her, this time with a trembling voice, I knew something was off. "I'm sorry, Ash," she said, barely holding it together. I can't say no to her. I don't know what to do." I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "Mom, you have to stop doing this. You're killing yourself trying to fix their problems. And for what? So they can just keep dumping their kids on you while they sit back and complain? No. You can't let them walk all over you anymore." "But I love them," she whispered. "And I want to help. I just don't know how to say no." I could feel my heart breaking for her. She was trapped in a cycle of guilt, and I couldn't fix it for her. She had to do this for herself. "Mom, I love you, and I want you to be okay. But if you don't stand up to them, they'll never stop. You can love them without putting your health in danger. You're not responsible for their kids. That's on them." She didn't say much more after that, and I could hear the resignation in her voice. It was like a dam had burst. My mom was finally starting to realize that she couldn't fix Sarah and Mike's mess, no matter how much she wanted to. But that didn't stop her from feeling guilty. The breaking point came a week later. I got another call from my mom, but this time, her voice was thin and shaky. I could tell something was wrong. "I don't feel good, Ashley," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "My chest hurts again." My stomach sank. I immediately rushed over to her place, but when I walked in, I saw something that made my blood run cold. My mom was pale, barely able to hold herself up. It was clear that she was in serious distress. "I'm not taking any chances," I said, rushing her to the hospital. It was confirmed. Her blood pressure had spiked again. The doctors told her that if she didn't make drastic changes, she was at risk of a stroke. Hearing those words sent a shockwave through me. This was it. This was the moment I had been dreading, the moment when I realized how deep the damage had gone. I had to act. I had to make Sarah and Mike realize what they had done. That night, I sat down with my mom and said the hardest thing I had ever said. You have to stop babysitting for them, Mom. I'm not going to stand by and watch you kill yourself for them. I know you love them, but you have to love yourself more.
She didn't argue.
She didn't have the energy to. And that was the turning point. The next time Sarah came by, Mom was finally going to put her foot down. The storm finally came, and it was just as messy as I had expected. It was only a few days later that Sarah showed up at my mom's house again, as if nothing had happened. The usual routine. She arrived with her kids in tow, smiling that fake, sweet smile of hers like she hadn't just caused a family crisis. Like she hadn't nearly sent my mom into the hospital. I saw red the moment I saw her pull into the driveway. This was the moment I had been waiting for. The moment I'd been preparing for. And I wasn't going to back down. I was already at my mom's place when Sarah arrived, and I watched her walk up to the door. My blood boiled, but I stayed calm. I knew I had to be firm. I had to make sure this stopped once and for all. As she was about to push the door open, I stepped in front of her. Actually, no, I said, my voice cold and firm. Sarah froze, her smile fading instantly. Her eyes narrowed, and I could see the anger flaring up inside her. What do you mean no? She snapped, her hands planted on her hips. I mean, you're not leaving your kids here anymore, I replied, crossing my arms. Mom just got out of the hospital because of her blood pressure.
She can't keep doing this.
And neither can you. I watched her face turn red. I knew she hated being called out. She hated being told she was wrong, but I didn't care. She had crossed a line, and it was time someone made her see it. You think you're so much better than me, huh? Sarah hissed. You're really going to stop me from leaving my kids here? I'm just trying to get by. You have no idea what it's like. I stood my ground. I do know what it's like, I said, my voice cutting through her anger. And you know what? You're not the only one struggling here. But you're not the only one who needs help, Sarah. You can't keep using Mom like this. You can't keep dumping your problems on her while you sit back and do nothing. You need to start taking responsibility for your own damn kids. Her face twisted in fury, and for a moment, I thought she might slap me. But she didn't. Instead, she stood there, seething, her chest heaving as she tried to collect herself. You don't get to decide that, Ashley, she spat. You're not the one making the sacrifices. I am. You don't know what it's like to have to raise 2 kids with no help. I didn't flinch. I had heard all of this before. Every excuse, every guilt trip. But I wasn't falling for it anymore. No, I don't know what it's like to let people walk all over me, I replied. But guess what? I'm not going to stand here and watch you destroy our family. Not anymore. Her eyes flashed with disbelief, and for a second, I could see her falter. But that didn't last long. She quickly turned on her heel, grabbing her kids and marching out the door. You're ruining everything, she shouted as she left, her voice echoing down the street. I didn't respond. I couldn't. I was done. For a moment, I thought that might be the end of it. But I knew better than to think Sarah would just accept defeat. Sure enough, later that evening, my phone rang. I didn't even bother looking at the caller ID. I knew who it was. Why are you doing this to us, Ashley? Mike's voice came through, shaky and angry. You're making everything so much worse. You're destroying the family. I rolled my eyes. You and Sarah have been destroying this family for years. You've manipulated Mom into taking care of your kids, and now look where we are. You've pushed her to the brink of a stroke, Mike. You're going to sit there and tell me I'm the one ruining everything? There was silence on the other end of the line, and for a moment I thought he might actually listen. Maybe he'd finally get it. But then he spoke again, his voice filled with the same defensiveness. That had become so familiar. She's your family, Ashley. You're supposed to help us. We're all struggling, and you're the one making it worse." "No," I said, my voice steady cold. "You're the one making it worse. You and Sarah. You've been leaning on everyone around you instead of taking responsibility. Well, I'm done. You two figure it out on your own." There was another pause, and then, as I knew it would, the call ended. I didn't expect Sarah and Mike to just accept my decision. I knew this wasn't going to be a quick fix. But what I didn't expect was how quickly everything would unravel for them. In the days that followed, I watched as their lives continued to crumble. Sarah quit her part-time job, unable to juggle the kids without help. Mike was working overtime, but it still wasn't enough. They were sinking deeper into debt, and there was no way out. And then, the ultimate blow. They had to move back in with Sarah's parents. It was a last-ditch effort to survive, and they were barely holding it together. The real kicker? When my mom called me to tell me the news, her voice was heavy with disappointment. "They're moving in with my parents, Ashley," she said, sounding genuinely sad. "They don't have any other options left." I sighed, but I didn't feel sympathy. "Good," I said bluntly. "Maybe now they'll have to face the consequences of their actions." And just like that, the chapter closed. Sarah and Mike were gone, at least for my life. I didn't feel bad for them. I didn't feel sorry for their situation. They had made their choices, and now they were reaping what they sowed. For me, it was over. My mom was finally free from the burden of being dragged into their mess, and I could move on, knowing that I had done the right thing. As for my relationship with Mike and Sarah, it was irreparably broken. But that was okay. Sometimes that's just the way life goes. My mom is doing much better now, no longer at the mercy of Sarah's manipulation. She still wishes things had turned out differently, but at least now, she can focus on her own health and happiness. As for me, I'm just glad to have my family in one piece again. I'm not about to waste any more energy on people who can't or won't help themselves. Looking back, I realized that sometimes the hardest thing to do is walk away from family. We want to help, we want to fix things, but some people never learn unless they face the consequences of their own actions. My relationship with Mike and Sarah will never be the same, but I've learned that it's not my job to carry the weight of their irresponsibility. We all have to take responsibility for our own lives, or we risk losing everything. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this story. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to stand up for yourself, even when it meant causing family conflict? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this.